Hi, everyone. Today we are continuing our lesson on the change that resulted um, to the lives of Americans during the 1920s and the Great Depression. We're really going to dig into the causes of the Great Depression today, so buckle up. We really have to look at, again, changing continuity. How did we get from the jazz era, the excitement of the 1920s, to the poverty, the destitution of the Great Depression? And so we're going to look at a couple of factors that led us to the Depression. Now, I want to come right out of the gate and let you know that this is an acronym. There are five main causes to the Great Depression: B, O, G, U, and S. If you're taking notes at home, and you should be, I want you to make sure that you record those down. We're going to talk about each of them in depth, but now is a good chance to make some notes just so you have a list. If you need to pause the video, go ahead. First, we get to bank failures, the B of bogus. Now, during the 1920s, banks made loans to borrowers who wanted to use that money to buy stocks. The practice was called buying on margin. Basically, it worked like this. I wanted to invest in the stock market, and in order to do so, I needed someone to loan me money to do that. So I might front $10,000, and the bank would front me the other $90,000, and I would then go and spend that $100,000, most of which isn't my money, on the stock market, thinking it was a sure bet because the stocks are going up, right? Prices are going up. So eventually, the market goes under. It doesn't stay, the prices don't stay going up. Market goes under. And so now that I owe a significant amount of money to the bank, I can't pay them back. My stocks are now more or less worthless, and I owe a significant amount of money plus interest because I borrowed the money to buy the stocks. Now, this impacts the banks because the banks don't have any money. They've lended out all of this money to different people, and they no longer have any actual assets financially to their name. So banks are going out of business. This leads to bank runs. Because the way banks work, I put my money in the bank. They don't keep my money in a vault labeled for me. They use my money to invest in other people for mortgages and car loans and whatever else, what have you today in the modern day. But that being said, during the 1920s and 30s, if a bank went out of business, you just lost all your money. There was no protection for you. And so as banks started to go under, we see what are known as bank runs. People literally running to the banks to try to get all of their money out. Some banks were forced to lock their doors. They locked their customers out of the bank. Others ran out of money. So the next thing we're going to talk about is overproduction and underconsumption. So really what this means is that during the 1920s, we see people starting to produce lots and lots of goods. Henry Ford, for example, his development of the assembly line allowed companies like Ford and others to massively produce goods at a much faster rate. It also made it less expensive to build these things. So we have more products available for purchase. Electricity is becoming more common, and so people really start to have a lot of goods available to them that they may not have had previously. So during the 1920s, we start to see a trend of welfare capitalism. Companies paying their employees really well or giving them all sorts of extra perks and benefits so that they have the money they need to buy the companies and other companies' products. Banks are starting to use lines of credit so people can purchase things and pay for them later. And then installment buying, the idea that you're going to pay a little bit at a time for something in order to obtain that item. So people are buying lots and lots of stuff and everything is fine. Now the stock market crashes in 1929. This means people don't have any more money because their money was tied up in the stock market. And so what we see is companies who keep producing and producing and producing no longer have anyone to buy. And so that results in businesses shutting down, wages are decreasing, and people are being laid off significantly. We see high unemployment. That is a typo. It should say unemployment. All of which result in a decrease in spending. So the next step we need to really look at is government actions. And there are two things the governments kind of did here. So the first bit is they changed the interest rate. Now the interest rate is an amount of money and a percentage that is kind of paid as a fee for borrowing money. The government has the ability to control this percentage. So if I'm the government and I loan you $10, or I'm a bank and I loan you $10, and the interest rate is 10%, which is a pretty high interest rate, but I loan you $10, that means you're going to pay me $11 back. Okay? And so what the government does is they increase the interest rate. They raise it real high. This means that businesses who are running out of money can't afford loans because the interest rate is so high that they can't pay back the loan plus the interest. And so they're not able to do it. This means that there is ultimately less money in circulation. Little bit of fiscal and monetary policy. The government has to really tightly control the amount of money out in circulation. If there's too little money, we have a situation called scarcity. Scarcity means that there isn't enough of something. So the government really tightly controls how much money is out there. And they do this by doing things like controlling the interest rate. Well, they raised the interest rate. And what really potentially should have happened is they should have decreased the interest rate that would allow people and businesses to take out loans, but they didn't do that. So that had a negative impact on the Depression. It made the Depression worse than potentially it needed to be. The other action the government took was they levied some tariffs. Tariffs are taxes, but they are taxes specifically on goods that are imported from other countries. The intent there is to make American goods cheaper and attractive to the American buyer. So they passed the Smoot-Hawley tariff. The flip side, the problem though, is that European goods were being taxed coming into the US, but Europe is also having a depression. And so Europe, in exchange, passes tariffs on American goods, meaning we are not getting as many imports and no one is taking our exports, so no one is buying American products. And this is not good for anyone. So the next one that we really have to talk about, the next cause of the Great Depression, is the unequal distribution of wealth. So the resource we have here really reflects kind of the concept of the 1% that we have today, but just, in 1929. So 5% of workers in 1929 made 70% of the income. So think about that for a second. Pause if you have to. 5% of the workers made 70% of the income. That means everybody else is getting the little 30% that's left. We see the rich getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. However, instead of making sound financial decisions, people who are maybe not making as much are using credit to purchase their stuff. So they're not paying cash for their goods. They're again going to banks, taking out loans, using installment buying in order to buy these things. And that was really prevalent during the 1920s. Especially as your home gets electricity, you start to want appliances and things. So the unequal distribution of wealth really led to a more severe depression than there might have been without it. The last piece here, and I want to come really clear with you, is stock market misuse. Now, I want you to know this. Please, please write this down. The stock market crash did not cause the Great Depression. The stock market crash did not cause the Great Depression. The stock market crash was a symptom of a bad financial system. People were abusing the stock market. More and more people are investing in the stock market, thinking it's a sure bet, thinking it's a real thing, not really taking into account the risk associated with being involved in the stock market. They're also using this buying on margin, process where you're borrowing money, using that money to buy stocks. It's a buy now, pay later thing. And believe it or not, the Federal Reserve, the bank of the government, said this is a great idea. You should do this. And so we see what's called a bull market. A bull market is where stock prices are going up and up and up. And eventually, prices are going to get to a level that is not sustainable. Prices cannot continue to go up because then you have impacts on other things like the amount of money available, inflation, interest rates. And so eventually, as prices get higher and higher and higher, and people are buying on margin, uh, we see it's a crash is inevitable. It was actually predicted by people before the crash ever took place. So the crash itself was not a cause, but people abusing the stock market system was. And so then we get to the actual crash itself. So October 29th, 1929 is considered Black Tuesday. Now, there are some other dates in your vocab that you're going to want to be familiar with. October 29th is really the day that is most common, but there were, about a week or so prior to 29th where people were starting to get nervous. They were starting to get a little bit scared. Everybody wants to sell their stock because of these days of uncertainty in the market. By the 29th, there's no one who's going to buy them. No one is going to invest in the stock market with this potential crash or loss losing. And so in 1929 dollars, you're looking at $16 billion loss within the first 4 to 6 weeks after the stock market crash. That actually equates to $225 billion in modern money, 2018. So the losses were staggering. We had never ever seen anything like it. And many historians and economists argue that we haven't really seen anything of that magnitude since. So again, back to our acronym: bogus, bank failures, overproduction and underconsumption, government actions, unequal distribution of wealth, and stock market misuse or abuse. Know these. You are going to see these in a future assignment.